If you love classic contemporary Christian music and the people that made it, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to help support us and keep us going. This is Stage Right, and I am your host, John Thorne. They say if you die with a handful of friends, you die a rich man. Well, I have several buses full, and I'm very excited to share them all with you. This is Stage Right. I am your host, John Thorne. I appreciate you taking time to tune in and listen today. So I don't know how many text messages or phone calls a month are normal for someone, but the other day I was talking with someone on the phone and I had 3 friends try to call me within like 60 seconds while I was talking to another person. So I tried to call all 3 of them back after I got off the phone with the first friend, and none of those other 3 people answered. Well, later that night, I was watching a movie with my wife, and 4 friends texted me within like 10 minutes, just bam, 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 bam. So I got the idea. I said to my wife, Julie, I said, log into our phone bill and see if you can figure out how many text messages or how many phone calls I get a month. So she looked it up on her phone while we were sitting there. And not at all to my surprise, she said in the last 30 days, I have had 356 text messages and 263 phone calls in just 30 days. And I thought, well, that's why I feel like I'm on the phone all the time. So forget finding a social media director. I need someone just to manage my phone. So I do say, I want to say 99% of all my phone activity actually is relevant and important, not only to what I do, but just keeping in touch with everybody. So, but it does explain why I feel like I'm busy all the time. So, all right, I want you to contribute to the show next week. If you want to contribute to the show, raise your hand. Okay, so I see those hands. Email me at john@stagerightpodcast.com, john@stagerightpodcast.com. Email me and answer this question. Give me your answer to this question. If you could spend one full day with anyone in the world, who would you want it to be with, and what would you want to do? So the top 3 answers, the best 3 answers, I will read during next week's introduction. So if you could spend one full day with anyone in the world, who would it be with and what would you want to do? So I got to say, all of my guests on my show, I'm excited to talk to them and share them with you, but I am really excited for my guest today to join me. He is truly one of the good guys I was fortunate enough to get to know when I was in Christian music down in Nashville every day. I'm still involved, still do a lot of stuff, but it's not my life like it used to be. Randy Ray is one of the nicest guys you will ever meet. He played bass. He and I did the White Hart Highlands tour together when Randy played for the fantastic rock group Legend 7. Had a couple really, really good albums back in the early 90s. And we actually talk about it and why Legend 7 didn't really go on beyond what it did. Kind of a timing thing, but I'll wait for Randy to tell you about that in the episode. Randy is currently on staff at Western Texas A&M University, and he'll be here right after this break.
Hey Rockstar provides digital marketing software and services to generate more leads, more exposure, and more revenue for your business or organization. Let Hey Rockstar amplify your awesomeness.
He is a leader of fine young men and women by day, a great bass player by night. I shall refer to him as the professor. Randy Ray, my good friend, welcome to the show.
Hey, brother. Hold on just a second. All right. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, my friend. Loud and clear. Okay, so I don't want to take up your whole day, so let's jump right in, Randy. When did you fall in love with music?
Wow, that's a big question. I hate to admit this, and I was talking to someone about it this morning. my family's always loved music, but I have to admit that my Beatles was kind of Kiss.
Right on.
How about you?
Oh, yes.
Were you a Kiss fan?
Absolutely. I was that perfect age when Kiss Alive 1 came out. I was in 8th grade. I loved Aerosmith and I loved Kiss, period. Those two bands.
I did too. I was. I'll tell you this story. When I was in junior high, I wanted toys in the attic, and I could. My allowance wasn't enough, so what I did, I started saving my lunch money, and I went an entire week without eating lunch. And a guy had an 8-track copy of Toys in the Attic, Aerosmith, and I ended up paying it off in installments with my lunch money. But I finally got to Toys in the Attic, and that's when I first learned Sweet Emotion too.
Right. That's such a good album.
Yeah.
Get Your Wings was actually my first Aerosmith album. I bought it, first album I ever bought with my own money, but I can't believe Kiss and Aerosmith are still doing shows.
I know it. And yeah, how many years ago was that? Yeah, I was in junior high. I can remember being over at a buddy's house and him pulling out Aerosmith records when I was in elementary school, and those guys are still doing it. So pretty amazing.
I know. Who knew when we picked them they'd be doing shows 50 years later? We picked well.
Yeah, the deal with Kiss is, those guys are not the greatest musicians, but man, what a show they would put on. And it was rock and roll, and it was lights and fire, and man, it was just such an experience. And
dude, I saw them last summer. My nephew Cody lives in Ohio. My buddy Rob lives in Nashville. We all met in Cincinnati and went to see Kiss. Gene is 70 years old, and they are still putting on a crazy great show. And they've got so many memorable songs, like one after the other after the other.
That's true. That's true. I'm playing in a classic rock band these days, and we do rock and roll all night, party every day.
That is so awesome, dude. All right, so Toys in the Attic. What a stinking amazing, great first album for you to end up with.
That was the first one that I bought, and like I say, I had to buy it on installments because I didn't have enough allowance money to buy it. But yeah, then I started fell in love with rock and roll, and that's when I started buying. I would buy ZZ Top was a big one for us growing up in Texas. Foreigner and Boston and Journey, all those classic rock guys that people are still listening to.
Yeah.
But that's probably the first record that I bought. Probably ZZ Top Tres Hombres.
First brand new album.
Yeah.
Okay, so while you were discovering rock and roll and all these fantastic bands that we never dreamed would be around 50 years later, were you a Christian at the time? Did you and your family go to church?
I did, yeah. My parents are really strong believers, and I've grown up in church, and I can remember when I brought that Aerosmith Toys in the Attic 8-track home, my mother was none too happy about it.
I'm sure.
So we had to listen to it, and there's a few. There were a few words in there she wasn't too happy about. So
right. Same with my parents.
But yeah, I grew up in a Christian home, and but there was always a disconnect in a way between music and church because honestly. I love church, and I was a believer. I was saved when I was 9 years old, but there was a disconnect when it came to music because I'll be honest with you, man, I am not a fan of the pipe organ or the piano or choir music.
Right.
It was different. I would go to church, and enjoy being at church, but not really enjoy the music.
Right. I totally understand that.
And I'm going to tell you this story. I'm involved with the C.S. Lewis Foundation, and I got to actually stay in C.S. Lewis's bedroom, which we can talk about. But as I was there, I went over to C.S. Lewis's church, and I was talking to a guy that had gone to that church his whole life. And I asked him if he knew Lewis, and he said I was really small when Lewis went to church here, but he said the one thing that he remembers is how much C.S. Lewis disliked organ music. And I said, you know what? Me too.
Dude, that is awesome.
In the 80s, I started, I was in one of the first Christian rock bands that was here in the Texas Panhandle.
Oh, wow.
And so you can imagine how that went over. So there were, decades of
right.
choir and organ music, and here's a bunch of long-haired guys playing rock and roll with Jesus lyrics, and it didn't go over too good in some of the more conservative churches.
Right. It would be really hard to explain to someone under 40 these days and explain to them clearly how different church music is now from what it used to be back then in the 70s and early 80s.
So yeah, there were a lot of places we'd play, and we were called, demonic, and we were called from hell, and and it was really sad in a way, because I think we were affecting the lives of some young people, and that's what we wanted to do. We love Jesus, we love the Lord,
Right.
and we were excited about the changes that He had made in our lives, and we wanted to share that. So it was really disheartening when we got stones thrown at us.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so how do you go from that then and decide you're going to pack up and move to Nashville and become part of Christian music on a much larger scale than you had done before?
Like I said, I fell in love with music, and that just went hand in hand with my faith, and I really wanted to do that. I got married. My wife has always been very supportive, and she said, "Let's go to Nashville. If this is really what you feel like your calling is, feel like you really want to do, let's move to Tennessee." So I moved to Tennessee, and I had not been out there very long when I reconnected with a couple of guys that I had played in other bands with here in the Texas Panhandle, a guy by the name of Andy Denton and Billy Williams. Mm-hmm. So we had known each other for years and years, and we just kind of reconnected in Nashville. And they had been playing out there, and they had made some contacts, and one of the guys that was an A&R guy from Word, his name is Bubba Smith, got interested in us, came to see us a few times, and so that's how that got going.
Right. Well, that was around the same time you and I met. Do you remember when we met?
Probably. My recollection is we were very honored to be asked to go on the Highlands tour with you guys.
Right.
And so we probably met on that tour, right?
Well, I had met you briefly before that when I was with Margaret Becker and we were rehearsing, and then Wayne Watson rehearsed down there. I met you then, but I didn't really get to know you until the Highlands tour. But the Highlands tour pre-production rehearsals, yes, that's when we actually started hanging out a little bit and talking at NCS, Nashville Cartage and Sound, for those who are wondering what those initials stand for.
It was really a cool place to work. People may not realize that when you sign a Christian record deal, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are financially independent.
Right.
So I still had to work when we weren't out on the road playing, and I was fortunate because I had an audio engineering background to get a job working at Nashville Cartage and Sound, and I managed their rehearsal studios.
Yep.
And what was cool about that is some of the artists that I got to work with. Some of the ones that were really cool for me personally, I mean, I grew up, like I talked about earlier, growing up here in the Texas Panhandle, listening to classic rock. Spent a lot of time, a lot of hours listening to Leonard Skinner. So it was really cool for me to get to spend weeks with those guys as they rehearsed in my studio.
Yep.
It was surreal to me one day when I came into the office. I walked into my office, and sitting at my desk was the lead singer for Leonard Skinner, using my phone, and I sat there and chit-chatting with him. And I said, if someone would have told me 5 years ago that this would be happening, I wouldn't have believed them. So that was really cool.
All right, give me some more. Other than Leonard Skinner, keep going.
I will tell you this story. I love telling this story.
Tell it.
Neil Diamond.
No way.
Neil Diamond booked a month in the studio because he's getting ready to go out on tour. But before he got there, his people came and said, whatever you do, do not speak to Neil. Do not look upon Neil. Leave Neil completely alone. He's a star. We don't want to bother him. I said, yeah, whatever. We deal with stars every day.
Right.
So, but the deal is Neil Diamond shows up, and he the friendliest, nicest guy you'd ever meet. He was hanging out in the office with us, laughing, talking. So here's a great Neil Diamond story for you. They had just gotten off of a tour, and the last date on the tour was in Milwaukee, and he took his crew and the band on a tour of the Harley-Davidson plant. And at the end of the tour, he said, okay, now you guys pick you one out.
No way. That's awesome.
Yeah, so that was really cool of him. I really liked him.
Yeah.
Dolly Parton, for example, is another one that spent a lot of time in the studio.
Cool.
And I was really I was a little worried about Dolly coming in because I figured that she was really going to be a diva. She was going to be high maintenance and difficult to work with, but I was completely wrong. One of the easiest person to ever work with, very kind, very giving, very positive person, and so I really enjoyed working with her.
Right. There's one thing about Dolly, though, that most people don't realize.
What's that?
She is tiny, tiny, tiny. She is so small.
She's very tiny, and I don't know if you remember. Remember when you came into NCS, you had that ramp that went down to the studios?
Yeah.
Well, we always had to move that ramp because Dolly could only wear high heels.
6-inch high heels.
And she couldn't go down the ramp in high heels, so we had to take the ramp out. But they said that she's worn high heels for so long, that's all she can wear. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but that's what they told us.
I wouldn't be surprised, dude. The first time I stood next to her, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
She was a foot shorter than me in those 6-inch high heels.
Yeah, and just the sweetest, kindest person you'd ever meet.
I know. The first time she met me, she hugged me goodbye and didn't even know me.
Yeah. Here's what I learned working at NCS. Artists that have been around a long time are generally the easiest to work with because they realize how important their monitor engineers, their techs are. Yep. And so they generally take good care of them. It's the new artists that have just signed their big fancy record deal, haven't been around very long, are usually the ones that are most high maintenance.
Right. Okay, before I forget, Randy, it's in my notes, but I do not want to miss this. I've wanted to ask you this since I knew you were going to be on the podcast. Do you remember what you did for me? You did a specific thing for me. Do you remember what that was?
I gave you a hug like Dolly did? Is that what you're talking about? No, I don't know what you're talking about.
No, I did appreciate the hugs, but no, that's not what I was referring to. Okay, so I can't believe you just off the top of your head don't remember what you did for me, but I remember. You must do so many things for people that it just is second nature to you and things don't stick out to you. But dude, I knew Jim White. I had rehearsed at NCS for years. I had walked in and sat in his office and talked to him a lot over the years, but I had no idea who his college roommate was. And you said to me one day when we were in rehearsing for the Highlands tour, you said, "Hey, you know who Jim's roommate in college was?" And I said, "No, who?" And you said, "David Norskaw, or David Eden as he's known in the music business." And I said, "What? David Eden from Eden Bass Amplifiers is friends with Jim White?" And you said, "Yeah, they were roommates in college. Maybe Jim would be able to get you an endorsement deal with Eden." And I was like, "No way. You were the one that told Jim that he should help get me an endorsement." And he did. And I still have that Eden bass amp to this day, all because of you.
Wow, that's cool. To this day, I am still an Eden user. I have an Eden amp at home, and I use the Eden DI, preamp DI when I play through in-ear stuff. I love Eden stuff, and I always enjoyed being around Dave Norskow.
I never met Dave, but he was so nice on the phone. And if I blew a speaker, he wouldn't even let me pay him. He would just ship me out a new one, and we'd swap it out. Just so nice.
Which one was it? Is it probably a 400 with 410 speakers? What'd you have?
Okay, so this is a crazy story, but I wanted a 400. So when David Norskow called me and said, "Okay, I'm going to ship an amp out to you. Which amp do you want?" And I said, "Well, I don't really need the 800 with the biamp and the 810 cabinet or anything crazy like that. I really love the sound of your 400 and the 410 cabinet." And he went, "Well, I don't make those anymore." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, you're kidding. Oh my goodness." I said, "Wow." And he's like, "Let me call you back." So he called me back like an hour later. And he said, "I have enough parts in my shop from the 400s. I'm going to make you a 400 and I'll send it to you. Even though I discontinued those, I don't make those anymore. I'll make one for you and send it to you."
Yeah, those amps are magical, I think.
Absolutely.
So I didn't realize on the Highlands tour, you and I both were using Eden rigs, huh?
Thanks to you, we both played Eden rigs on that tour. I don't think you can to this day, you can't top the sound of an Eden bass rig. Probably the reason you don't remember me having it out there was because we had that upstage right riser where the bagpipes would come out and play at the end of the show and stuff. I would stand up there and my amp was 5 or 6 feet off the ground on a couple road cases and it was pointing up at me, I would stand up on that column and then hear my amp up there. So it never really, nobody could ever see it. So you probably didn't realize I had it out on the road then because it was basically hidden. But yeah, man, I could never, ever, ever thank you enough for helping me get that endorsement deal with them.
I'm glad I got to do that for you. I always loved the way you play. I've heard many people through the years say, that you were the Michael Anthony of Christian music. So
That's awesome.
which is that's a huge compliment because that guy is still playing and still playing better than he ever has before, and
Right.
Has a lot of respect in the industry. So I always liked the way you play, and I always, when we were on tour with you, I would always kind of hide over to the side of the stage and watch what you were doing.
Wow. That's really nice of you to say, Randy. The thing about my bass playing, I always understood who I was, what I did well, what I didn't do well. And I got a call from Margaret Becker, and she wanted me to send a tape. This is back right before I moved to Nashville. She wanted me to send a tape to her band leader, and so they could decide if I was good enough to be part of the guys they invited to come in and audition. So I called Rich, the band leader, and said, look, my kind of bass playing, I'm better in the room than I am on tape. So why don't you let me drive to Cincinnati and I'll just play with you guys. It's not an audition. It's just a chance to hang out, get to know you.
Yeah.
And I'll just play with you. And he was like, oh my gosh, you would drive down here and do that? And I said, absolutely, I would do it because my bass playing is much better in the room. It's more effective. You'll feel it in the room, whereas the tape might not translate who I am as a musician.
Yep.
I always play songs the way I think they should be played and not just the way I want to play them.
Well, I think that you and I have a similar playing style.
Yes.
In that I am most happy when I'm sitting in the groove.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And I'll be the first to tell you I am not a real fancy player. I don't. I'm no Anthony Salee. I don't play like him at all.
Right.
But I'm most happy when I'm locked in with the drummer. Because I've always said, when I've given bass lessons and stuff in the past, I feel like the job of a bass player is to give note to the kick drum.
Yes.
So my job is to lock in with the kick drum, and that's when I'm happiest. And that's what I feel like a good bass player does.
Yeah. Now, one of the reasons I love playing bass is it's rhythmic and it's melodic. But the role of a bass guitar in a band, especially a rock band, but any band, the bass is supposed to be the glue that holds everything together. And that's what you and I do really, really well.
I totally agree. And you know what? Because of that attitude, I have always been able to get work.
Right on, dude. That's awesome.
Brother, I'm playing more now than I played when I was in Nashville.
That's cool.
So I'm staying really busy. And I think that's part of it because two things I think, one is, like we talked about, you just need to be the foundation for the band is. And two, I talked to Mike Brignardello one time, who's a phenomenal session player.
Yes.
And he said it's real important to be a good hang.
Yeah.
And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, just be easy to get along with and pleasant to be around and do what other people need you to do. So those two things, I think, have kept me playing through the years.
For sure.
Those two pieces of advice.
And to that point, you are truly one of the best dudes I ever met when I lived in Nashville.
Well, you didn't get out very much, did you?
I got out plenty. And oh, by the way, I met almost everybody. And I'm telling you, dude, you're one of the good guys, one of the gems that ever came through Nashville.
Well, I'm going to tell you this, and I have said this for years. I'm one of the most blessed people that's ever walked the planet. How many people moved to Nashville, Tennessee,
right, with
the dreams of doing what you and I have got to do?
I know, right?
How many people? Not many people. So I've been blessed, and I tell people I'm the poster child for that verse in Psalms that says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart."
Yeah.
Well, you're looking at it right here because I have got to do all that stuff in Nashville and even more.
Right. Well, I got to say this. I say it a lot on the show, so everybody's probably heard this over and over and over, but I got to say it to you. The best part about doing what we did with who we did it with is I can call you all these years later and ask you to do my podcast, and you'll say yes, and here we are.
I agree, and John, part of that I really believe is being on the road together. That really, I think that really bonds people together too.
I think it does. And I think a large part of that is because you're out living your dream together. You're sharing it. It's a shared experience with friends.
You know what's strange is I have talked to people that are in the military,
Right.
and it's a very similar kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's a very similar kind of thing.
I could see that. Okay, before we move too far past NCS, if it's okay, I just want to tell you one more story from there.
Okay.
All right. So one day I walked through the front door, probably waved at you as I went by, and I walked down the ramp. I get down the ramp. I'm right in front of Studio B, and somebody's in there playing Dire Straits songs. So I walked back up the ramp, and I said to you, "Who's playing Dire Straits songs? They sound really good." And you looked at me and smiled and said, "Mark Knopfler is in there." And I'm like, "What?" And you said, "Yeah, it's Mark Knopfler." So I walked back down, listened for a few minutes. Then I had to get to Studio A because we were doing pre-production rehearsals for the Highlands tour.
Yeah.
Okay, so I come out from the Highlands rehearsals at lunchtime, and everybody had left before me. So I came out kind of late. I come around that corner to come down the hallway and go up the ramp, and two guys are blocking the hallway, one leaning on each wall talking. It was Mark Knopfler talking with Chet Atkins. So I immediately came to a halt, and I stopped, and I turned, and I leaned on the wall. I'm about 20, 25 feet from them, and I'm just leaning on the wall. I wasn't listening.
Yeah.
And there was no chance, zero chance, I was going to interrupt them or walk between them. So I just stood there, and all of a sudden, Mark Knopfler said, "Excuse me, mate, do you need to get through?" And I said, "Well, I do, but to be honest with you, there was no way I was going to interrupt you guys." So they're like waving me through, and Mark Knopfler, he like shook my hand, and then Chet Atkins patted me on the shoulder, and I was just like, "Oh my gosh, I cannot believe this." One of the top 5 moments in my life in terms of meeting musicians, talking to musicians. Now, I didn't interrupt them. I didn't, give them my name or ask for their phone number or anything stupid. I just was like just shocked and blown away that I'm literally standing there with those two guys, two of the greatest guitar players ever.
Yeah. That kind of stuff happened every day,
Every day for you. I can't imagine going to work and having a job where you can sit outside those walls and hear that great music.
I will tell you, guys like Mark Knopfler, Peter Frampton, Steve Winwood, those kind of guys were there all the time. And those British guys are the nicest, most considerate people you'll ever come across.
For sure.
It was, again, surreal moments for me growing up listening to those guys and then getting to hang out with them a little bit.
Yep.
I will tell you this, you either, after working with an artist, you either become a bigger fan or you cannot stand them anymore. And there's a few that when they come on the radio now, I have to turn it off.
I won't make you say their names.
Yeah, don't ask me who they are. But.
All right, I won't. All right, so take me from NCS and tell me, how did you transition into becoming a music professor?
Well, probably, it was 90. After the Legend 7 Days, we did 2 really successful records. Not as successful as, say, your Petra or your Whitehearts, but we were still pretty successful at that time.
Yeah, for sure, dude. And those albums were really good.
And I was really proud of them. But as you know, that time that you and I were, not long after the tours, kind of when grunge came around and kind of shut down that arena rock kind of thing.
Yep.
So I decided that I wanted to start teaching. So I still continued to work at NCS, but I started going to grad school at Middle Tennessee State, which is in Murfreesboro, about 20 miles outside of Nashville.
Right.
And I started going to grad school out there, and they said, we know about your work at NCS. We know you had a record deal. Would you be willing to teach some classes for us if we pay for your grad school? And I said, that sounds like a great deal. So I started teaching at Middle Tennessee State. I taught like a studio management class. I taught a multi-track recording class, and just really fell in love with it there. And as I was finishing up grad school at Middle Tennessee State, my alma mater here in Texas, West Texas A&M University, called me and said, would you be willing to come to work for us out here, because we're in the big process of building a $32 million fine arts building, and we need someone to teach and manage the studios.
That's remarkable.
And it's hard, you know what, honestly, I loved, my family, we loved Nashville, and that was a big decision to make, but it was God's perfect timing for us to come back home and be around family again. So it was, again, I'm going to say, I am the poster child for delight yourself in the Lord, and He'll give you the desires of your heart.
That is so amazing.
It's been a fantastic. So I came back and I got to help design a $32 million fine arts complex. I got to design studios like I wanted them. I got to have basically a blank checks to go, and I've literally spent about between $3 and $5 million on studios since I've been here.
Oh my gosh!
So it's fantastic. We have the facility. I built a radio station. We have 2 huge video studios. We have a multi-track recording studio. We have editing suites, both audio and video. It's a fantastic facility, and they've treated me like royalty here. And this is my 20th year, believe it or not, to be back.
I am so happy for you, man. That is so fantastic. Now, how big is the school? How big is your department? Like, how many students do you have?
The university itself, our enrollment's about 10,000. So in a given semester, I'll have a little over 100 students that are just basically my students.
Oh, that's great.
So I get to teach the cool stuff. I mean, I get to teach multi-track audio stuff like we learned out in Nashville.
Yep.
I get to teach video production. We are right now, this week, wrapping up a documentary that we shot about a local nonprofit organization that feeds hungry kids.
Cool.
We're excited about that. About 2 years ago, I got to go to Israel, and I got to shoot a documentary.
Right on
the West Bank.
Wow.
I got to serve time with the Israeli army. I got to go to the Golan Heights and to shoot this documentary, which was a fantastic opportunity. A few years ago, I did a documentary on Downtown Women's Center, which told the story of 4 ladies that were drug addicts and homeless, and how successful they become after going through the program. So I'm still doing creative stuff, and it's a cool way to make a living.
For sure. Okay, so pretend I'm a senior in high school. I'm deciding where I'm going to go to college. I love music. I love sound. I love video. Give me an idea of some of the classes that you've either taught or you teach now that I could look forward to.
Well, over the last 20 years, I've taught a lot of different ones. Basic audio production, advanced audio production, video production, documentary making, studio management, media management, that kind of stuff.
Okay, so do you have a favorite, 1 or 2 that you've taught? Do you have one that sticks out to you?
One of my favorite classes to teach is a class just intro to the media, and I tell them, my name is Randy Ray, and I have worked in the media in some capacity, probably for 30 years, and I will tell you this: I love the media, but I don't trust the media, and then we start unpacking.
There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, and you think about it's really different, John, than when we grew up. You and I were talking about buying records when we were young. Students these days don't do that anymore.
I know.
They don't buy music anymore. They don't really listen to the radio much. They don't watch TV like we did. They don't read books. They don't read magazines. So the media has completely changed for this new generation. So it's a different world than it was for you and I.
Okay, so because it is so different, how in the world do you connect with them? What do you use to connect with them?
A part of it, I think, is my time in the music business, just talking about some of these experiences that you and I have talked about today. And I think they like hearing that. And I think that they like having a professor that's actually gone out and actually done stuff,
right,
instead of being in school their whole life.
Right. Okay, so let's play chicken or egg. which one's more important, life experience or education?
Education is very important, but I think real world experience is equally as important.
Right. Okay, so then in this world of computers and software and all of that stuff, are there more people that want to play music with their friends and be in bands and do live stuff, or are they sitting there with headphones on, staring at their laptop, using apps and stuff?
It's a different. There are some that are just passionate about music, and they want to continue. They want to record and they want to be in the studio. They want to learn about audio. So you just have to find the right ones. Not everyone is passionate about music. I have students that are equally as passionate about sports broadcasting.
Right.
So you just have to find their niche, and you kind of have to groom them toward their interest.
Right. Okay, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Okay, so you and I, we still listen to Kiss, Aerosmith, Journey, Rush, all the bands we used to love. Why do you think most Christian fans listen to the Newsboys or White Heart or Petra or Legend 7 for a period of time, but then eventually they kind of age out or move on from it? Why do you think that is?
Part of it, and this is not the entire answer, but part of it, John, you think about worship songs, which I love worship music. I play bass pretty much at least 2-3 times a month at my church, and I love doing it. But you think about the shelf life of worship music.
Right.
Those songs don't stick around very long at all.
Right.
And I also think part of it was not long after you and I were in the business really changed, and it was a shift from artist over to worship music.
Right.
In some ways, it was a good change, I think. And looking back, I wish that we could have maybe been more worshipful in some of our songs. I don't know, but I just think that Christian music changed, and when that shift came,
yeah,
it was almost like they lost some respect for the earlier artists, which that is a sad thing to me, because you look at some of those early artists, like your Russ Taffs,
yep,
and your Wayne Watsons. I mean, I still those guys sincerely helped my walk.
right.
My walk with the Lord, my walk with God was really influenced by those guys. So it was just as a big a deal for me to meet Russ Taff as it was for me to meet Peter Frampton.
Right. Me too.
It really was, because in a lot of ways, Russ Taff made a bigger impact on my life than Peter Frampton did.
Absolutely.
And so I agree with you. I'm sad when I think about these new worship leaders, these guys that I work with now and play with, which, by the way, I'm usually the oldest guy in the band.
Right.
But when I work with these young guys, they've never heard of Petra, or they've never heard of Rick Kua, or they've, some of those guys that I have so much respect for still.
Right. Well, let me ask you this. I want to get your thoughts on this. Okay. In my opinion, once record companies realized that there was zillions of dollars out there, once Shout to the Lord hit the radio, and everyone realized, oh my gosh, we can sell 1 million copies of worship music. Worship music then became about money. And to me, the whole ship ended up in the rocks, washed up on the beach after that. Am I wrong?
Yeah, but let me tell you the other side of it. And I want to go back to when we first started this interview. Remember me talking about the disconnect that I had between going to church and classic rock,
yes,
listening to music.
Right.
I think that we have bridged that disconnect a lot with worship music, because I love going to church on Sunday and playing and listening to the same songs that I listen to throughout the week.
Wow, that's really interesting. I have never thought of that, and have never heard anyone else say they thought of that.
And I also go back to those early days of me and the guys that I played with around here,
right,
in those early Christian rock bands that were so ostracized.
Right.
But I feel some pride in that, because I think we helped usher in,
sure,
maybe contemporary worship at least a little bit. You know what I mean?
I've never thought of it that way, but you might be right.
I'll be the first to admit I am not a huge fan of traditional church music.
Right.
I believe that, and it just never That's just not what appeals to me.
Right.
And I also believe that God said, in Psalms, sing to the Lord a new song, and I'm all about that.
Right.
Let's sing to a new song. Let's sing music and play music that we like, that helps us worship.
Right.
And I think we've gotten to that.
Right. Well, you've given me something to think about, because I have never looked at it that way.
I love my church. I love still being involved with the music side of it.
Right. Well, I think it's really interesting. You've got great insight. You've got great perspective. But there's one thing about you that just hit me. You've got 20 years under your belt as a professor dealing with college students. I think that helps you in the church when you're leading worship with younger people who may have a harder time with a lot of older folks, like being part of the praise team or whatever. But I think they look at you differently because you look at them differently.
Yeah, John, I think what you should do, man, is you should take ownership in a way, and by that I mean I think you and I and people in the 80s and 90s contemporary Christian were helped usher it in ways.
Sure, I could see that.
And I love it. I mean, you think about most churches that you go to today basically have a rock band up there.
Whether they're good or bad.
I mean, really,
Yeah.
it's a rock band, and it's you got distorted guitars, you got a bass guy, you got drums, and that's the stuff I love.
Right. Well, there's nothing better than a worship department or a worship team that gets it right. And I was a worship director for about 14 years at a church, and there were a few people that got it, but for the most part, man, it was like swimming against the current or running against the breeze constantly.
I would encourage you to find a place where you are appreciated and your music talent is appreciated. Because I feel that way. I mean, even though, like I mentioned, I'm any given Sunday, I'm the oldest guy on the platform playing, but I've kind of taken a role of mentoring the younger ones. They enjoy hearing my stories about being on the road. It's a good place for me, and I think you could find a place like that too.
I would love to find a place like that. That would be awesome. I was talking to a buddy of mine, Jeff Quimby, who used to play drums. We did a Wayne Watson tour, Twyla Parrish tour. We did Idle Cure. We played for Margaret Becker for a few years together. And Jeff was telling me a couple of years ago that he played drums the previous Sunday, and that was going to be the last time he ever played, because he said, I think I've aged out. Nobody listened to me. They didn't know how to let the drummer count in. They didn't listen to any suggestions. And this is Jeff Quimby, who actually ran Vertical Records for Integrity. He's like one of the, high ups years ago in the worship movement. Fantastic drummer. And he plays at a church where everybody's 25, wears skinny jeans, and doesn't listen to him.
I've heard that term aged out before. There's another podcast out there. I don't know if you've ever heard it. It's a worship bassist podcast. And it's just talking about bassists. But there was one episode where they were talking about being aged out. And I am more concerned about it than my church is. I mean, I said, I don't want to be the old guy up there. And they go, no, man, we love you being up there. For one reason why is that it looks good to the congregation to see different ages up there.
Right.
And so, yeah, I can see that happening in some places. And my thought is if it's happening in your place of worship, you might want to
find another place
go visiting, because it's not about how old you are. It's about worship.
Right. And there's also this little thing in the Bible that's called maturity and growing up. And youth and beauty are not accomplishments, no matter how hard certain people try to make them so.
I tell you what's been really cool for me is I will have students in class, and we'll talk about the music business or something, and they'll say, "Are you still playing?" And I say, "Yeah, I play all the time. In fact, I'm playing at church this Sunday. Why don't you come check it out?" And so that's sometimes a good way to
That's awesome.
Get some involvement out of them, and so that's been really cool. And then there's also been times where I will say, "Yeah, I am playing Saturday night. I'm playing in my classic rock band Saturday night out at some place." We don't really play bars, but we'll play community events or whatever. I said, come see that, and then next Sunday morning I'm playing at church. So
That's cool.
they kind of get to see a little bit of both that way.
Right on. That's cool.
Hey, John, I have a question for you. I've been wondering about this. I didn't want to ask you.
Okay.
Who is your favorite bass player? Who is your biggest influence?
Who is my biggest influence? Well, I would have to say, just by osmosis, Tom Hamilton from Aerosmith has got to be an influence as much as I listened to him growing up. Gene Simmons would be an influence because I listened to him growing up. One's really, really good, one's not so good, but I did pick up things along the way, especially when I was learning. But I would have to say one of my favorite bass players that I love to listen to because of the way he plays, the way he phrases stuff, is Mike Porcaro from Toto. He passed away several years ago, but Mike Porcaro, he may be my favorite bass player. And of course, I've got friends in Nashville that I love. I mean, Anthony Salee is a monster. Mark Hill's a great bass player. Jimmy Lee Sloas. Gosh, they're everywhere. There's great bass players everywhere, but I really love Mike Porcaro.
Talking about Toto, working in Nashville, I got to be around, and his name escapes me right now, the first Toto bass player.
Oh, David Hungate.
David Hungate. So I got to meet him, and nice guy too, and it was really cool because he showed me the lick on Africa, so.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So who's your favorite bass player?
Well, here's another story. One of my favorite bass players is someone you've never heard of. This guy by the name of Felix Krish. Have you ever heard of him?
I have.
Felix Krish. He was the guy that played on all that 90s Bad Company stuff.
Yep.
And if you listen to that 90s Bad Company, he also played on a Richard Marx cut. He played on a Foreigner record.
Yep.
I think he had a very unique style of playing. I always loved his playing. About 3 years ago, I taught a study abroad class in England where we went, and it was about the Beatles and C.S. Lewis, believe it or not. So we went to Liverpool, and then we went to Oxford. Anyway, I was able to track him down, and I had it set up so that we were going to have dinner together. And the day before we were supposed to have dinner together, he had a death in the family, couldn't do it. But it was really cool for me to get to have at least email back and forth with one of my heroes.
Right. That's great, dude.
Yeah.
Brian Howe, what a voice on that stuff for Bad Company.
Yeah, that's my kind of music right there.
Incredible voice. And those albums, man, they had great songs.
So that 90s Bad Company stuff came out about the same time we were in the studio recording. So I was trying to emulate my hero Felix Krish as much as I could. Don't know how well I pulled it off, but it was fun to do anyway.
Dude, you played great on those albums, and live you rocked. You guys were so good. I was just surprised that it didn't last longer. It didn't last much after the Highlands tour, did it?
Not a whole lot. We did, we signed our record deal in 92, and we did another record in 94. And like I say, they did pretty well, but it was just that was kind of when that shift in Christian music kind of started. Fortunately, we were on Word, which was a great record label, and they were really supportive of us for the most part through all of that. And they're the reason why we got to go on the Highlands tour with you guys. They pushed that. So
right.
I can't complain about a record label. I just think that our style of music had run its course.
Right, which inevitably it does for most everybody. Speaking of running its course, Professor, I'm going to give you the closing word for today. What have you got? What's your closing thought for the day?
Well, let me end with this. John Thorne, it's been fun rekindling our friendship. We had some good years together, and we have seen things and done things that most people only dream about. So I appreciate the opportunity to get together with you and relive some very happy memories. So thanks for asking me to do this. I'm behind you, brother, and I love you.
I love you too, man. You are a great dude, great bass player. I'm sure you're a great professor. Tell everyone one more time where you teach, where they can find you.
Yeah, it's West Texas A&M University, located in Canyon, Texas. It's in the Texas Panhandle, and I would love for you to come for a tour. I'll show you our fantastic facility, and we'd love to have you. And I will send you the link to those documentaries and a link to the university for your website.
Sounds good, my friend. Have a great day, Randy. I will talk to you soon.
Hi, brother. I love you.
I love you too, bud. Take care.
Hey Rockstar provides digital marketing software and services for your church to generate more interest, create more exposure, and reach more people. Let Hey Rockstar amplify the awesomeness of your ministry. And, as always, Hey Rockstar is a proud sponsor of the Stage Right with John Thorne podcast.
Thank you so much for listening today. Thank you, Hey Rockstar. My special thanks to my good friend, Professor Randy Ray. Next week, former booking agent and author Greg Golden. Have a fantastic week, everybody.